Uh, just to set the background, the tectonic shifts, plates of commerce have shifted over the last decade, right? All goods and services have moved online. Customers have adopted digital behavior like never before. The shift has accelerated, right? As we adjusted to the effects of pandemic, we know what has happened during the pandemic and the role digital and innovation solutions are given. And in this digital first world, consumers expect everything to be available on a click. They get what they want, whether it's in a store or whether it's online. And in the recent times, in the last 6 to 7 years, right, it started with the demonetization, UPI, more recently, account aggregator kicking in. And there have been some wonderful apps and experiences that have been brought in customers, right? So on one side, there has been a whole lot of innovation focused on removing friction and getting banking as a service, neobanks and those kind of services. The API world is really coming into play. But on the other side, there's an entire talk, right, about customer rights, data privacy, and globally this is being debated. We are not the only country talking about it. So you all heard about what's happened in the EU in recent times, what's happened with them in the large fintechs, and a lot of these conversations happening in our country. So I want to straight away dive to our witnesses, Ramesh and Akhil. And maybe Akhil, we could start with you to set the context, to set the tone. Is innovation in the payment system and consumer protection on the opposite side? Is there tension between them? What's your view on this? Do you see them as sharp contrasts, or how do you look at that?
No, I first, thank you, NPCI, IMAI, for having me on the panel, and I think the topic is very well suited to the context of the day. We are seeing very rapid innovation today in the ecosystem. And I think, in terms of be it regulation or customer protection, they always tend to be at a slight lag to innovation. And if you think of it, it actually makes sense because there's no point having a customer protection policy or a framework or even a regulation before even what innovation will happen and do. So today what we see is there's a lot of innovation that is running ahead. Most of it is below the radar, which means that it is not scaled up yet. These are happening in pockets. They're happening for niche use cases, and they're getting bigger. When it comes to customer protection, I think it eventually does get driven, and all banks, all entities have a risk-driven framework for customer protection. And I think as the innovation starts scaling and as things become bigger and bigger, both ends of the banks as well as the regulator also start taking note of it, and then they draw the frameworks around the whole thing to make sure that there are some ground rules for it to operate in. So to my mind, these are not really opposite ends of anything. They are really lock and step to that extent.
So Akhil, I understand. I think what you're trying to say, there's a very delicate balance between the two. And again, what you summarize is innovation seems to take the lead with the regulation and the framework following. And given that in India there's a lot of conversation around DEPA. I'm sure you've also peeped into it. Do you have any views to share on that? How do you think that changed the construct? What will it bring to the consumer at the end of the day, and how would it impact organizations just like yourself?
Sure. And look, now again, I think DEPA is a fantastic example of what we just talked about. There is a lot of data that is getting generated, be it personal or on a small MSME entities. There's a lot of data that is getting generated. And for example, I can cite an example. On a small MSME today, you can have a 10 gigabyte file. And that's a lot of data to be able to look into, to be able to provide the right service and product to the customer. Now, as we have more and more digital adoption, the data explosion is happening as we see. And DEPA is really the framework to that extent, which will have put this sort of emerging paradigm of data sharing, data analytics, and riding on the back of data to provide the suited idiosyncratic products. And as we just talked about earlier, the framework has been in the making, I think, for about now more than 2 years. And at the same time, the explosion of data has happened so rapidly. So it is absolutely the need of the hour now, I believe, to have the framework come in. Because in absence of it, we will be severely constrained in our ability to share data and do the good things that await us and the consumers.
Right. Thanks for that, Akhil. Ramesh, to you, with India looking at DEPA, what's your view? How do we compare in terms of regulation and what's being considered in our country vis-a-vis what's happening across the globe, especially in Europe and Singapore and those kind of countries?
Yeah, no, I think that's a interesting question because frankly, and I've been, in my previous avatar, fully exposed to GDPR, just to give you a little more perspective. Uh, when it came, and it's like Akhil said, when GDPR was first announced in the European markets, there was so much of I would say insecurity, uncertainty, and seeing whether this will work. How will this disrupt business? What will happen? What we saw exactly the opposite. Actually, like Akhil said, the innovations found how to go about it. Take a simple example. I mean, whether it was a right to delete, a right to forget. I mean, things like that. When they came in initially in the GDPR, said, "Kaise hoga? It's not possible at all." But there are techniques, tools that industry figures out how to do. But at a larger level, I think for coming back to your basic question, I think it is very important, like I said, because frankly now the digital explosion has happened. Today, there's a very thin line of difference on data privacy. I mean, we all know that it's kind of at the margins, and the room for error is very, very minimal, given the kind of geopolitics that is getting played out, the kind of data that is flowing around. So I think it is very important that we get it right. My sense is that and if we compare globally, I think we need it more. If you ask me, because just today, that I mean our adoption of the digital is probably the fastest in the world. We all know that. I mean, even we kind of moved ahead of the China and the US ecosystem. Right? I think it's important. And I sense that the tools and the automations, in fact, there's a great opportunity waiting around bringing different thought processes to see how DEPA can be actually operationalized, so to say. Arif. I also think it's very important that while we get to the framework itself, the policy itself, but all the ecosystems around it and how fintechs can get together to solve for these problems. That's also a very equally good opportunity if you ask me.
Yeah, thanks for that. But Ramesh, I'll just stay with you for a minute more. Like when we talk about European countries, a lot is driven by consumer representation, right? Which I believe that in our country is not that proactive at this point in time. The fact of the matter is we have roughly around 200 to 250 million digital customers in the country. So there's a huge potential base that organizations like yourself and I'm sure Akhil's organization are trying to tap, whether in the form of financial inclusion or doing things like feature phone. So I think the problem that Europe has is very unique vis-a-vis what we have in our hand. Because we have a lot of people that we will onboard in the coming years. We have a young population. So when you look at what's happening in the country, what would be your one suggestion for the think tanks, the regulators to consider from a context of India? Is there anything you would like to offer there?
That's an interesting question. Again, as I said, because and you're right. We can't just be adopting in a way that we disrupt the digital, highway that we're creating. It's a very, very, again, fine balance. I think what we have to do is we have to take into account what are reasonable parts of the policy, not just go about it. Like take an example. If you ask me, some of the elements of the GDPR would be difficult, even from the perspective that we look. Maybe 3 years down, 4 years down, when we've seen the maturity of the models, we will get there. I think it's important to keep that in context. And a lot of focus, if you ask me, is defining a certain baseline where we are doing that. I mean, whatever has come out in the draft forms and whatever has seen, I think largely my view is that there will be a sensible balance of saying we will do as much to ensure that there is the absolute protection and ring fencing of what is required. So whether it's and it's happened. I think the beauty that even if you look at what's happened with something like Aadhaar, and we keep talking about it in the banking industry. I mean, when it came first, everybody said, "Oh, vaulting kaise karenge? It's not possible." This, but today, largely every bank, every institution that's regulated has figured out a way, right? So I think you do something which is base framework, which is very critical to protect from a customer privacy perspective, but at the same time allow the ability to kind of, like Akhil said, the usage of the data, how it can be aggregated, taken to a level where a lot of analysis and a lot of kind of meaty, data points can come out, and that helps in building the digital ecosystem rather than, kind of, stemming it, so to say. I think very clearly that's how I'm looking. So the baselines have to be very carefully defined, and it has to be in phases, not necessarily one big bang approach. I would really suggest that.
Sure. And you believe the baseline is being defined now?
Tough one, Arif. Look, I would believe so. I think there will be debates, like that. I mean, take an example of DPSC. Forget about DEPA. I mean, even in DPSC, we know that 125 was a number of checkpoints. Frankly, if you ask me, even if you get to 80, 90 across the banking industry, you've done a fairly good job of where we were, right? I think fundamentally that's why I said, if you don't say that everything has to be fully done at all the points of time, I think we'll be okay, if you ask me. And that's the reasonability that I'm looking for, at least.
Right. Thanks for that, Ramesh. Let's go a little inside. I mean, let's try and understand a bit more about what's happening within your organization, right? So, Akhil, I'll take a start with you on this. You've spoken a lot about financial inclusion in the past. I've been in conversations with you where we've spoken about how consumers getting DBT credit into their accounts, how could we use that trail to perhaps generate some kind of credit going for them. And then again, at the same time, this is a segment that really needs the most protection. So how does your organization go about it? Besides the customer awareness and education, on the practice side, what are the steps that you folks take, whether it's technology or operations process? What are the kind of controls that you guys think about and bring into this?
Sure. So, see, first, let me just lay the context of our financial inclusion practice, and I think it's important to mention, of course, as a public sector bank, there is a disproportionate amount of financial inclusion occupies a disproportionate agenda for us, and it is disproportionate to my natural market share. In fact, we have about 6 crore FI customers today in the bank. And that is about 10% of the market, right? And that is a couple of percentage points higher than our non-FI customer base. 60% of our branch network is located in the rural and semi-urban areas. Now, all that means is we carry a sizable responsibility in terms of making sure that the customers understand when they engage with us, more so when they engage with us through digital means. Because while innovation is positive, there is a lot of innovation that is happening, for example, on the fraud side as well. And that is really becoming a sort of a menace to an extent, which does not, in most cases, tap upon the vulnerability of the systems, the technology platforms, but the gullibility of the consumer herself. And that is where it is very important to make sure that the customers understand the do's and don'ts of engaging with the digital platforms. And there are multiple ways this happens. One is, and I'll give you some examples of, what we have. So while we have from time to time campaigns for customer education, for sharing the do's and don'ts, etc. But we have 3 properties which are permanent properties, which basically act as a touch point for customers to be able to get educated on the new products and how to engage with them. There are 52 Baroda Grameen Paramarsh Kendras, and this is for financial literacy and financial counseling of farmers. There are 49 Baroda Swarozgar Vikas Sansthans, that is to impart training to the unemployed youth in rural and semi-urban areas. And there are 49 financial literacy and credit counseling centers, Sarthi, in outside of the rural areas. Now, these areas are staffed and manned by local champions in many cases, along with our bank officials. And while our bank officials do enjoy a fair amount of trust with the local customers, a local champion, a local digital champion coming into these financial literacy centers and imparting know how acts as a catalyst for the understanding of the market overall, because the language that in which the local guy champion can translate is very effective. So to that extent, I think there is an agenda that we have, which is of course to deepen the digital penetration in the beyond tier 1, 2, 3. But at the same time, I think customer protection needs to if there is one area where customer protection needs to really follow hand in glove and it cannot lag, it is beyond the tier 3, 4. And I think we of course take that responsibility very seriously. In fact, I've seen in many cases now, on a daily basis, I see some guy, who says that there is some OTP, which has been compromised, or a phishing attack that has compromised, and the level of discussion has also elevated in terms of what did I do? This is the platform that I use. Of course, it is not across the board, and many such things do not even come to the notice because the customer doesn't know, what to do. But wherever there is knowledge, I have seen customers even coming back to the bank for very small amounts of sums, and having a discussion. At the same time, I think the regulator, of course, is very seized of this, and all banks are required to have a customer protection framework, and especially in cases of digital transactions, the framework effectively ensures that the customer's liability in most cases is very limited if there's a compromise that happens outside of the gullibility of the customer. And that, I think, is great comfort. Secondly, some of these things that are fairly, I would say, compromisable, which is, for example, having one FA payments. In India, we have systematically taken out one FA payments, barring a very small segment, right? And I think that also has improved the discipline and the culture overall, and made it very amenable for the pickup. And of course, what we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years in terms of digital transaction explosion is a result of this. Otherwise, if had these things not been in place, things would have fallen flat by now.
Thanks, Akhil, for that. So, Akhil, looks like there's a lot of focus on educating the customer, training them, advising them, whole lot of literature supply and simplify for them. So I get that, and I think that's an extremely relevant pillar. But Ramesh, if I have to move the ball to you, can you talk on the technology side, right? What's happening over there, and especially what are you doing on that area to protect the customer, right? In terms of whether validating him, whether it's two-factor authentication, or are you going to the next level? I mean, two-factor authentication is by regulation, so we all adopt it. But is there anything else your organization is particularly looking at?
I think, in fact, you kind of read my mind because I was about to come from that perspective. There are three aspects to this. One is the front-end terminal aspect, where you're kind of taking the terminals down to, right? I think clearly, and if you ask me, to me, two-factor is still not done. I don't think OTP SMS can be called two-factor. And let's live in that reality. I mean, we have reached that stage today. We can keep talking about it, but it is not. I mean, we know that. So fundamentally, I think we'll have to look at that framework very differently. In fact, we have started making some move in that area, because I truly believe that identity management will need to be fairly stringent, because the way we are today, especially on the SMS based, it was a great innovation when it came. I think it was a really, I would say, forward looking. But like Akhil pointed out, people catch up. Right? I mean, it's very easy today to kind of break your phones, look at your OTP. So we'll have to move that model. Largely, there are very interesting, features coming, whether it's biometric, whether it is tokenized kind of two factors, whether it is three factors that are coming in. A lot of changes happening in that landscape, and I think, and we have to be careful in the financial inclusion space because there is also the balance to try to overdo security, and make it complicated. Then the inclusion agenda can kind of go for it also. So I think clearly there are some moves happening there, especially I think the soft tokens or some of these new age scan technologies can come in, and I truly believe that some solutions are coming in that sector. The second aspect to that is the terminal security. I do believe that we have not put enough focus. See, when the ATMs and the POS machines were built, one good thing you have to understand for all the wrong reasons, the terminal security was phenomenally well taken care of. I mean, the way the key injection processes, the way the generations, the way the encryption pipelines were done, it stood its time. I mean, today we can keep arguing, but the pin blocks today are fairly well encrypted. They were encrypted, 20, 25 years back. Right? I think we have to focus on, I would say, terminal security in a big way, whether it is TLS 1.3 beyond, whether it is, certification of terminals, automation of key management. All of those areas have to be very, very closely. I would say that ecosystem is evolving. There are weaknesses today, especially DBT, APS-based payment systems, and we are strengthening today. In fact, just to share an experience, I've spent almost last 6-7 months focusing exclusively in that area, bringing the entire terminal population into a security field. The third, obviously, once you are attaching a lot of these ecosystems, and today if you look at the FI ecosystem, it's very interestingly played out. It's not a one-to-one ecosystem. There are a lot of partner connections coming in, a lot of API gateways coming through. And I believe there, again, if you ask me, the days of the classic north-south segmentation is gone. I think we'll have to move into a network which largely micro-segmented, and it is protecting at a very, very granular level. We can talk about defense in depth and zero trust architecture till cows come home. But the reality is that I do see this being a very, very key element. In fact, we have started moving in the direction now because I see, and if you go back in the history of India's cyber attacks, a lot of them have happened because of non-micro segmentation. The traffic has moved phenomenally easily on the east-west right side. Every single case, I don't want to name the cases, but actually where I'm coming from. If you ask me, those are three aspects. So one is basically the front-end multi-factor authentication revamp has to be done. The terminal security and the transportation security has to be strengthened. And then your inside your data center networks have to be micro-segmented and kind of completely kind of important of view. And that's the three-way strategy we are at least going about. And like Akhil mentioned, we have a very interesting tie-up with CSCs actually, which is our vehicle to do the entire financial inclusion. And we are, and a lot of it is API-based terminal connections back from the CSC terminals into our networks. That's an area. That's why I mentioned specifically the third part of the API, security as well. So it's four things actually: front-end security, the terminal security, network security, the data center security, and then on top of it, how do you protect your API gateways? So. And there is a lot to be done. I would be very honest with you. It's not that we have. And the unfortunate part, unlike in cards where the money has gone in, the similar amount of money has not gone into the financial inclusion systems. We often find people thinking about low-end systems, trying to buy out something at a cheaper cost because that's how the business otherwise are done. I think that's an area that's about to change. It is changing very fast, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's about convincing the management and the board that, in financial inclusion also there is reasonable amount of value to be created and made for oneself. But Ramesh, to your point, I have two follow-through questions to both of you all, in fact, right? You actually mentioned that, on the terminal side, it's not you alone, right? There are a lot of partners. And obviously, both HDFC Bank and Bank of Baroda, and especially Akhil, as I was stating in the start, right? He's like the messiah of startups. You engage with so many startups and fintechs, right? You'll do so many services, you'll sponsor them. The question is, and they do great work. Obviously, they've really created a lot of value in the ecosystem. How do you manage and control them? Do you get to see what they're doing in detail at a transaction level, or is the partnership at a periphery, right? So how does one, from a technology point of view and from a process point of view, exercise enough control? There have been these cases where wrong categories have been used, assigned to a merchant and a terminal. How does HDFC Bank deal with that? What is the steps that you guys take?
Reference is actually again something which is very very topical because uh, you know the DPSC has come out in that sense, and, in a very very I would say right opportune time. But even minus that, I think what has happened, and I'll be very again candid and honest about it. I think, and I've said that in multiple interactions that banks have to start owning architecture and design. I mean, there is no way that banks can say, "Oh, I will," some partner is coming and he will do the work, and I will do some checklist and he will fill up the checklist, and I will hope that everything. I think that's been a fundamental flaw to the model for us. This checklist-based, certification. And we've been really hotly debating. In fact, I'm kind of putting some frameworks in my bank actually, where I believe first of all the assessment of the partner has to have security. I'm not talking about security and the technology assessment has to happen in parallel to the business assessment. A lot of, and I'm being again honest about it. A lot of time, just this partner seems to be great on the business side. He's kind of giving me great ROI chart. He's giving me good business functionalities. Let me bring him. Then once you do that, retrofitting after that is a absolute mayhem, because whether it's like you said, whether just upgrading the encryption software, upgrading the kind of database design, all of that is a mess after that. Right? It's not possible to catch up.
Ramesh, let me torture you a bit more on this, right? Since you're wearing a technology hat on this. So how do you control? You guys sponsor so many apps and so many other things, right? What are the rights and permission that app seeks? I was speaking to somebody the other day and says like, it's almost signing a will to the app owner that, I'm giving all permissions, all right, they can see anything. And most of the time consumers are clueless as to what they are agreeing to on the app in terms of permissions. And how does one restrict that? How does one control that? How does one moderate that? And do you have insight into it?
So I think 2 points here, and there are two different aspects to this whole discussion. One is how do you see when you build an app itself, like I said, it's very easy for you to put some restrictions. Like as an example, I'm just taking example that if you build a mobile app today, my sense is that a lot of times you are going to a vendor partner and you are kind of allowing him to kind of say, okay, I need this permission, this data will be stored into the local phone memory. How do I kind of look at it? Mirror attacks is a very interesting example, right? On mobile apps today, biggest, if you know what I'm saying, the biggest loophole has been mirror attacks, screen mirror attacks. In the last 6-8 months, go back and check the data. But how do you control it? See, one thing is to say, I know the problem, but how do I control it? My views here, and it's not yet there, I'll be again candid, we still continue to run ASSTs, the classical application scans and checks, and then of course the design checks to see whether the application is coming through the filter. But it's not a foolproof kind of mechanism. The way I look at it is that build the DevOps pipeline with the partner. It's a very, very important aspect of the discussion. You cannot have an offline DevOps pipeline. Those days are gone. When you're talking about a fintech partner, he understands the DevOps like nobody else, and you have to be on his pipeline seeing policy as a code. It is not about saying a checklist comes from the behind. So what we are trying to do, I'm actually pushing very hard. It's a long journey. I'll be honest with the number of partners, the number of the large ecosystem we have. But what we started doing is to start controlling the DevOps pipeline coming into the bank through the fintech vendors, and defining the baselines, defining the policy in the code format, and automate the checks. That's the only way. I think it's still.
Ramesh, I'm going to interrupt you. I think we need an entire day for this conversation. So I'll just squeeze in one more question, Pooja, with your permission. Akhil, to you, you've done this Bob World, and I'm hearing some great things. I think it's a great initiative. But at the same side, right, there is this entire thing about tracking. We've been talking about in terms of what Apple has done recently, where the app tracking, what it allows you to do or no. And then there is this cookie that we use on the Chrome and so on, which is a great opportunity for marketing guys, right? And in a certain way, because that enables the entire marketing initiatives around it, it subsidizes for a lot of things. What's your view on that? Because at the end of the day, we are talking about customer privacy over here, right? So the trackability, do you think that will have a bearing?
So look, these are of course very, I think, two very different things. One is the ability to reach the customer. I'll just take the cookie one first because that's important. And while Google has extended, the sunset of cookies to 2023, I think it eventually will happen. My individual view is it should not happen. In fact, if anything, we need more contextual advertisement. See, advertisement becomes irritating when it is devoid of any context. And if you are operating in an environment where I see a billboard which makes no sense to me, and I keep seeing hundreds of billboards, it's much better to see 5 of them which are very well suited to my daily life. And that is what something like a cookie actually enables. And there are some alternatives to that in the format of index DB and local support storage and all. But I would say these are lesser parallels, and the experience of a marketer will certainly deteriorate if cookies are not there. So that's on the cookies front. I think we need, if not cookies, you call it whatever, but we need technologies to have more context-based advertisement. That's for sure, right? I mean, see, on some platforms, I'm a teetotaler now, nearly so, and I keep seeing Oaksmith and all these things. It doesn't, it makes no difference to my life, right? And I should rather be seeing something which makes a difference to me, right? So that's number one. On the Bob world, of course, thank you for the feedback, and we've had some very nice customer feedback come in, roll in. We already have about 1.3 crore customers that are using Bob World application. It is an application which aggregates banking services and beyond, and a lot of them are powered by fintech players. Which effectively means that we've been able to bring under the same hood and umbrella an agglomeration of services that matter to the customer. And I think in a very small fashion, this could provide, and there are some services that we've tried to provide which are offering more context to the customer. And I think, if I just look, but in no way it is a replacement for that cookie, because cookie helps in retargeting. And if the cookie is not there, then I think that the whole engine fails. So what we've done is we've provided an experience, an entry point to the world of banking and beyond in a very smart way. And the feedback has been very encouraging. There was someone who...
Sure. Thanks, Akhil, for that. Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Yeah. Good.
No, I was just saying, wrapping it up with saying there's one customer who said, you've now made a Mona Lisa out of the application.
That's cool. So, Ramesh, I think it's time for HDFC Bank to get some Picassos in the picture now. All right. So, guys, it's been a great conversation with you two. We could have gone, with you two, I think we need a couple of hours. You guys have a ringside view. But thank you very much. And I do hope the audience enjoyed it. Pooja, back to you. Thanks.
So thank you very much for such an enriching experience. I think, like Mr. Khan said, that the entire day can go by and this discussion can just go on and on. But just because of paucity of time, we'll have to wrap it up. But a sincere thanks to each one of you. Thank you very, very much for such a powerful discussion. Please take care.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Arif. Thank you, Ramesh.
Thank you. All the best, Akhil. Thanks, Ramesh.
Thank you. Bye-bye.